Welcome back to the Stargate Oral History Project. I'm David Reed. I really appreciate you being with me for this episode. I have such fond memories from Stargate Worlds, and I have been blessed, Katie and I have been blessed over the last month or so here with bringing people back together whom we have admired for years, who created something that folks in the Stargate community only got a glimpse of. And today, I am thrilled to be able to explore that with one of the key designers here. In fact, the creative director, Christopher Klug, creative director of Cheyenne Mountain Entertainment, and the spearhead of the story that was Stargate Worlds. And Katie, we're back with you as well. Thank you so much for being here. Chris, thank you for coming on.
Oh, you're welcome.
How are you?
I'm good. Very happy to be with you.
It's been a while since all of us have been together in one space. Where are you now? What are you up to? And what is your secret, Chris?
Yeah. So I'm still teaching game production and game design at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh. That's what I was doing when Cheyenne hired me, and I was lucky enough to go back to it after it ended, and I've been doing it pretty much ever since. I teach about 75 grad students every year who want to go into video games or animated film or location-based entertainment. So, I got to tell stories about what I did and how I did it when I was working in the industry.
How often does Stargate Worlds come up in terms of, here's something that I was lucky enough to do, or here's something that, if you're lucky, you won't have to do?
Yeah, well, so that's an interesting question. I tend to, I have three sort of go-to projects that I talk about with the students when I say, here's a problem, and I'll talk about how we tried to solve it. One is a role-playing game that I did for the N64, and then another was the project that probably got me the job at Cheyenne, which was Earth and Beyond, which was an MMO for EA. And then Cheyenne. And the interesting thing about Cheyenne is I tend to use the projects as examples of ways to behave in times of stress, as sort of weather vanes for the students about mainly what not to do. The big story about the video game industry is, surprisingly, it's not as success in the industry is not as much about your skill as it is what kind of human you are, meaning how fun you are to work with, how well do you get along with people. And the earlier two projects before Cheyenne were good examples of incidents that maybe the students might want to avoid when they get into the industry for various reasons. But the team at Cheyenne was so astonishingly easy to work with for the most part that I tend not to talk about it too much. The reality is, gosh, it's hard to say, but none of my students know what Stargate was. They're just too young, right? They're all 22, 23 years old. And I can say things like, you know, how many years the show was on the air and the records it set and the audience share, and I'll relate stories about Brad complaining to me about treatment that he felt was unfair because Battlestar was the critical darling, and why weren't people appreciating the work he had done like anybody would, right? I mean, just schmoozing. But it's hard to remember how influential the show was and what a big deal it was. But it's not a good example for my students.
Right.
Because they don't know it, right? They don't even get the MacGyver jokes because they don't know what that show was. So I don't talk about it as much, actually, as I talk about the other two games. And the other part of it, frankly, is it never shipped. So it's hard to get footage. It's hard to show the game. It's hard to really talk about what players did because a lot of it was never proven. So it doesn't come up as often as you might think, sadly.
That's a fair point.
Because the people were the best.
That's right. Katie?
Hi.
Hi.
I'm gonna let you in. I'm gonna let you feather in here, Chris. What I would really like to set up is the roadmap that led you from Earth and Beyond into Stargate Worlds at this stage.
Sure. Yeah.
If you could
Okay.
discuss
So let's see. Earth and Beyond. EA science fiction universe set in a intellectual property that hadn't seen the light of day in any other form, which was the biggest challenge. You couldn't say, hey, you've seen the TV show, come play the game, which we could say all the time, right, for Stargate. We were explaining how the universe worked at the same time we were explaining how the game worked. That was a challenge. But there had been a deal that had been discussed with TiVo, of all people.
Really?
Yeah, so I was in meetings where the following idea was pitched. The idea went like this. Hey, EA, you're a big video game company.
Yeah.
TiVo had used Vegas, which is where the studio was for Earth and Beyond, as a test market. So everybody in Vegas had a TiVo. This is
okay.
2001, and the TiVo seeding had happened in the late 90s, I think. 1990s. Anyway, so there was some interest in pitching a television version of Earth and Beyond if the game did the same sort of numbers that EverQuest was doing. If we were sort of approaching EverQuest numbers, they were going to pitch a TV show to sit concurrently with the game. So I had been in planning stages for exactly that sort of thing. It never happened because we didn't get close to the EverQuest numbers, but it was in discussion. So when I was approached by, it wasn't Cheyenne then, Cheyenne's name came later, whatever it was, the entity, to be the creative director, I sort of had been approached twice early on, really early on. Jill Zinner, the recruiter, had contacted me.
Oh my gosh, Jill. Oh my gosh. Amazing.
She really pushed me hard, but certain people at the studio weren't interested in giving creative control to somebody else.
Which studio are we talking about at this point?
It's the thing that became Cheyenne, but it wasn't called Cheyenne.
Understood.
Are you talking about like Jim, Daryl, Todd?
I wasn't going to say their names.
Sure, I mean...
Okay, well then, yeah, it was Jim. Jim really put the kibosh on hiring me. And then Joe eventually convinced Jim that maybe he needed to rethink that. And they came back to me like, I'm trying to think, 6 months later. And that's when it got serious. And in those interviews with Joe, I talked a lot about the plans we had had for Earth and Beyond. And Joe was like, really?
That's right.
Because he thought that would be a good thing to talk about with Brad.
That's right.
That I had a background in shared IP usage across media. And it turned out to be true. That was the thing Brad and I talked about the most. And as we know, I don't know how many seconds it is of footage of the game sits in the pilot episode of
Universe.
What was the show?
Universe. Air Part 1. Yeah. A good 15.
And that bit came from the discussions that Brad and I had when I first sat down with Brad. So
well, you can't leave it there, Chris.
Go ahead.
You can't leave it there because I remember you telling me this story about the potential nugget of the idea that Stargate was inside of a game space all along, being played by a gamer at a computer.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
I remember that.
Yeah. I can't remember. I mean, yes, that certainly surfaced in the next show. But where that came from, okay, so this is really going back. So my memory of early conversations with Brad was him talking about his daughter. He's got a daughter, right?
He has two.
Okay, well, one of them was really sort of leaning on him a little bit to kind of get with it with this whole gaming thing. Come on, like, your TV shows are for old folks. We all play games. That's a very simplistic statement, and I'm not attributing those words to coming out of his daughter's mouth, but that was the vibe. In other words, in a world where Stargate's demo was not skewing as young as Battlestar's was, David, right? Am I crazy?
Unfortunately, no.
Okay. In that world, one of the things that Brad was trying to do with the next iteration of Stargate was try to get it to skew younger. I remember that conversation. And he saw the game as one of the ways to do that. And he joked at one point about it would make his daughter happy. I think that might have been as far as it went.
And this was this was kind of at the dawn of the era of, there were a lot of game companies as well as TV streaming services that started thinking along the lines of merging that's how you got Game Tap, and that's how you got Game Tree TV, and that's all these things that we don't hear about anymore. But there are games on Netflix, and there are games on Prime, and
so I later had dinner with a TV writer who was trying to make this exact idea work. Somewhere in the mid-teens, there was a cable TV show where there was a game and a TV series at
Defiance.
the same time.
Defiance on Sci-Fi Channel.
Oh, there you go.
Defiance,
Well,
yes.
I had dinner with one of the writers of Defiance.
I remember
we
that
were
so
kind of kicking around how to, how to do that, how to come up with a way of, because the design challenge is always who goes first. In other words, if you're going to set up an event that happens sort of simultaneously in some fashion, well, you tee it up either in the TV show and then the game picks up and does something with it, or you tee it up in the game and then the TV show picks up. Because there's no way you can really do simultaneous stuff.
Right.
The lead time, right? You're writing back in the era of 22 episodes of TV. You begin a season in the writer's room. I remember vividly sitting in the writer's room in Vancouver and Burnaby. And they had Atlantis on this whiteboard over here, and they had SG-1 on this whiteboard over here, and the plates are being spun and everyone is working, and it's hard when that pressure on the production budget and timing is bearing down on everybody to worry about what the stupid game company's doing, right? And trying to sync up with them. The one guy I remember being really interested in seeing what we were going to do with it was Martin.
Interesting.
I had on the aircraft carrier, the evening on the aircraft carrier, I had a relatively long discussion with him about what we were thinking about doing. And really, at that point, I didn't know enough about the next show to really understand where he was going.
Right.
Brad, this is. And we hadn't even launched yet, so a lot of it was theory, not pragmatic. It's like, well, if we have a game and if it's successful, what we'll think about doing is this. We just never got there.
And
But
there
the
was
midway is
discussion.
when,
Yeah, go
sorry,
ahead, Katie.
the midway is when, like, we had overlapped with them at Comic-Con, at the panel, and we had overlapped with them. Sometimes someone...
I have a story about that panel.
Okay.
Yeah. No, we'll save it.
Okay, but what I was
Okay.
going to say is, like Chris had been to the office and we had met some, whenever you went to Burnaby, you might meet someone in the field, or I had met a couple of them at Chicago where I met David, and, so, and when they asked about it, like I remember Mike Shanks asking, like, oh, tell me more about this. Like he was just curious about it.
Yeah.
And then the next time he saw me, he said, we're doing voices, right? And somebody, I can't even remember who the other person was standing beside him, said, well, I am, or something. And he was like, I haven't been. And I'm like, guys, it's so early. It's so early for this. Like, we're literally, But then on the midway, when they saw and heard the trailer, and like we've talked about with Nick, that music blasting out, then I think they were like, oh shit, look, this is a thing.
Yeah,
like this is
real.
an actual thing. And so at the reception after, when you were talking to Martin and various of us were, walking around talking to whomever, that's when they were like, oh, instead of just going, what do you do? Oh, yeah. And then walking away, it was like, oh, you're working on the game. Well, they had questions now, and they were kind of sitting up in that moment a little bit more than they had been.
Yeah, the relationship with the TV show was so much a driving force from the point of view of the kind of game we wanted to do. But because it was a theoretical possibility, and needed, probably in retrospect, needed Stargate Universe to work and needed the game to work. It was hard to argue that in design meetings inside the dev studio as being anything that anybody really needed to worry about, because it required all these things to work, right? But in the discussions that I would have with Brad, and it's certainly not like we talked even every week or every month. We probably talked, once every 3 months, as we just sort of needed to keep him informed about what we were doing. It was definitely the long-term goal for both him and I to try to do this. And it could have been really, really interesting. But I know that politically inside the dev studio, that was viewed as probably not going to happen. I think that there were some designers who were skeptical of the chances of that being pulled off. But what they didn't know is the tantalizing possibility of that happening. The vibe I got was the only reason that's why Brad signed off.
Wow, to do something in
Initially?
tandem. Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
in the-
No, so let me be clear about this, because I don't want to get a phone call from Brad Wright saying I misquoted him. He said to me in my first meeting with him, people think the show is about shooting. It's not about shooting. It's not about shooting. And every game that has ever been done, there was one in Australia maybe, I think, was a shooter, and it annoyed him. It really annoyed him. And he said, so here's what I want you to do. I'm going to give you a month or 2 months. I really want you to think about what the show is, and then come up to Burnaby. I think I told you this story, David, didn't I?
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, I'm remembering it now.
Right. Come up to Burnaby and show me that you understand the show. And I'm like, sure, I can do that. I mean, I was trained as a theater person, and script analysis is, everybody has to do script analysis. So, I got some scripts, and I spent the Christmas vacation that year. And what I did was, you can't watch all those episodes in one sitting. You can't, right? And I'm like, okay, so let me think about this. I know that every season would end and he wouldn't know whether it was going to get renewed or not. That I think he had told me that, or somebody had told me that.
At that point in time, that was correct.
Okay, good. I'm glad I can remember that accurately. And I'm like, okay, so if I'm the showrunner and I know that I want to leave them at the end of the year with something that's going to entice them to renew, I'm going to go out with my guns blazing, and I'm going to write the essence of what the show is. And so what I did was I cherry-picked like the last 2 or 3 episodes of every season, and I just watched them. And I realized the show wasn't about, laser pistols. It was about friendship.
Yeah.
That was the show. The show was about the relationship between the team and their relationship to each other. And I wrote him a document and analyzing the show from that perspective. And when we went up to Burnaby for the meeting, he's like, okay, let's talk, because you understand the show. And it wasn't an amazing discovery. I think that the evidence for what the show was about was on the screen. But what worked for him was that I wasn't like other game designers and worried about the combat first and the character second. It was, I think my sense was from his perspective, it was the other way around.
Well,
that the characters are more important than the combat.
I remember hearing the stories from Earth and Beyond, and you approach a ship full of children, and this has to happen or this has to happen. I think Katie said it very astutely in a previous episode. It's various takes on fundamentally the trolley problem. It's like there are no right answers.
Right.
Often the case in life, you have to pick one, hold your nose, and go and pray that you've done the best that you can, because that's life, and right. The problems that the SG1 team often faced were very much like that, and that's what we connect to as human beings. Not, oh well, the last week I was on P3X421 right. and this out. It's like no,
that's not
my dad's dying of cancer, and I have to go to work because it's what I have to do. And, there are people counting on me to do this. And that's what we vibe with. That's what we relate to as human beings.
Yeah. It's the needs of the many outweighing the needs of the few or the one. And it's the no man left behind, right?
Those juxtaposing those two ideas together.
Yeah. And so part of the tension as the schedule reared its ugly head, game development always takes too long, and nobody really knows how long it's going to take till you finish. And as we face the realities of the budget and the schedule, and we were late. I forget what our original ship date was, but I know we were late. I'm just saying. I mean,
everything was in those days, and MMOs especially, but yeah.
Right, yeah, no, it was, right? And so things like downloadable content or updates or pushing some of the game off till later on, all that was in its infancy at that point. Now it's what you do, right? You don't ship the whole thing when you launch. You ship a piece of it. But that idea hadn't really succeeded, or the track record of that succeeding wasn't as prevalent then. So when Dan and I and the leaders were trying to figure out how to get enough out the door to make people happy,
right,
and get them to sign up, I was always looking at it from the point of view of how do I set up this ongoing sequentially segmented story in a way that makes the most sense. And you can sort of see that in the slide deck I found doing research, that we were pitching that kind of story. But
the serial story, right?
A serial story, but you needed to get it out the door for that to work, and you never got it out the door.
Would you like me to open that and explore that document at this
sure.
stage?
It's
like
sure.
Christmas morning, man. Oh my God, I haven't seen this in 20 years.
I've got, the challenging thing for me is I've got, when I glibly said to you in email, I've got some slide decks. And then this morning when I went and looked for them, I'm like, there's like 7 versions of this.
I see.
And I remember vividly working with Steve Garvin and Sean to prep this, because the 3 of us went up to pitch it. And so it kind of has this feeling of what we were trying to do and how we were trying to deliver these updates. Because the only way that we were convinced that especially fans of the television show who are used to that kind of storytelling structure, right? That a thing happens and then next week the next thing happens and the next thing happens, and this all happens in one season, and then the next season this other thing happens. They're going to lean into that because they understand it.
That's correct.
And I remember thinking when the ZeniMax game, the Elder Scrolls game, I mean, they were sort of trying to do the same thing. They weren't as far along as we were, but they ended up shipping because they had more money eventually. But so anyway, do you want me to just go through this?
I'm going to share. Yeah, I'm going to share this.
Oh, you're going to share it? Okay, so we're all looking at the same thing.
Yep, and I will be your piano page turner. So just let me know.
Right.
What you are about to see, folks, is what I got to see. I'm pretty sure before it was. Pretty sure you threw this at me, Chris, just to.
I'm sure we did. I mean,
and I was just.
I mean, you got to set the stage for a minute, right? So I had this relationship with the writing team at a distance. We didn't want to show what we were going to build story-wise until we were darn sure we could do it. And the last thing we wanted was for the showrunner to hate it. Ugh, that would not be good. So I'm sure we showed it to a bunch of people before we took it up, right? So, yeah, I'm quite certain that you probably saw some version of this before we took the flight to Vancouver.
All right.
So go ahead.
Let's have a look here. At this point, I had been established with Chris. We had had a lot of long meetings together, and there was no point in my mind where it was like, no one else can be doing this thing, because we had already seen your document for that really broke down the show into the elements of friendship and striving to ascend, and so that had all come before, and then we had what grew into the shape of what the game was going to be, and that is this.
So what we needed to do in the meeting was explain where the game was going to sort of peel off a little bit, right? Because I'm trying to think, I can't remember whether we knew that SG-1 was going to end. I forget all of this. I knew that Universe was coming, but I can't remember whether the timeline of all that had been worked out. I honestly can't remember.
We found out later. Yeah.
Okay.
During production.
I'm glad you can remember. And so the meeting was, okay, so let us explain to you our thought process about where we're going to sort of step off that bus, your bus, and sort of go do our own thing. And so this idea of, as the slide talks about, for us, we're picking it up at the end of season 8, right? And I'm just gonna, and so we're summarizing where we are, and what the system lords are doing, and what each of the races are up to. Because if you remember, we were going to let players play not only just Stargate Command, but the other races. And so we made it harder for ourselves than maybe we should have. But the idea that every race was going to have its own arc
Right.
It's a big
means
deal.
we were writing the Free Jaffa story and the Goa'uld story and the Asgard story, and right, I think there were 3 races of good guys and 3 races of bad guys. I can't remember now, but anyway, so this slide's about where we are when the game starts, and then we go to the next slide, which is the big reveal, which is that we were going to reboot Ra. And I remember vividly being that this slide was the slide we were nervous about.
Of course.
Because we needed Brad's okay to do this. And we put this right at the beginning of the deck because if he was going to get nervous, we wanted him not to sit there for 45 minutes and then get nervous. We wanted him to get nervous at the beginning and say, stop, right? Explain what you're doing and why you're doing it. Because rather than back-ending the big reveal and having him feel like, oh, I liked all that, but now I have to approve this. If he was going to say, nope, this doesn't work for me, he would say it now, but he didn't. I remember him being sort of like, well, of course you would do that.
Really?
Well, in the sense of he could see the story rationale for it.
Okay.
Right? In other words, if we're going to make the show feel familiar to the core fan base, the discussion, as I remember it, went sort of like this. Do we invent a brand new villain that they've never met? Or do we bring somebody back that they know and would love to get another shot at?
Well, and this captures people that aren't just fans of SG1, but the original movie as well. Because this is a familiar villain to both camps.
And
so
the
you don't
Supreme
have
System
to have
Lord at
seen
that.
SG. You don't have to have seen SG1 to jump in and understand what's going on.
Right.
If you're a fan of the film.
The setting it at the end of that season allows us to mine and not have to reinvent all of the known lore of the way the universe works and who the bad guys are and what their story is. We can just sort of step right in and leverage it. And so that idea it tees up like everywhere that we were going to go from there on. I mean, yeah, we were inventing new stuff. We came up with this version of humans called OpCore, which was sort of like a dissident political group. We had to do some invention to. I'm laughing because, yes, we invented many things, including power armor, which I'm sure that...
You have to go somewhere.
Well, we can talk about that, because that was one of the more humorous situations we got ourselves into. But there has to be things in the game that they couldn't do on TV, and Brad was very gracious about saying, sure, of course. I would do power armor, but I can't afford to.
That's the
sort
thing.
of thing.
Yeah.
And so that there were things that the game could do and explore that you can't really do on TV. And we were going to do that. So again, I'm glad you put this slide up. So there are 6 playable races. Stargate Union comprised of those are the 3 good races, and then the bad guys were the Goa'uld, the fundamentalist Jaffa, and the renegade humans were the OpCore. And yeah, I'm pretty sure the name Praxis was a name that we invented. And so each player race has their own journey from a character creation to level cap told through a series of missions. And so, that's how it starts. And I remember having a discussion about, was Brad going to understand a fundamental distinction, which was in a TV show set to explain the relationship between the Stargate characters, the humans. I mean, they're not all humans, I know. Why were we going to complicate the story by doing these other races? And indeed, having to write 6 stories, not just one story. And some of that was the thing that was normal in an MMO at the time was this idea that you had elves and dwarves and humans and lizard people and whatever, and it was
How did they get here? Yeah.
Part of the fun was playing something that you weren't, right? Fantasize that you are an elf. Fantasize that you are a dragonborn, to quote a D&D race, right? And we felt it was important to be able to deliver that in an MMO about Stargate. But man, that's part of what makes MMOs really hard to deliver is that breadth. You know, it's like this really expensive to put together buffet and you're feeding everybody, and you can't really do something like Horizon Zero Dawn does, which focuses on one character and tells the story through their eyes, and everybody who plays it plays that character. What brings people to an MMO is playing a bunch of different characters.
Can you
makes it hard to do. Yeah, go ahead.
Can you speak to, like, I remember Star Wars, like Star Wars Online was out or soon to be out. Everybody, they had a dilemma of everyone wants to be Luke, right?
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Or 80% of people
man.
want to be Luke. Can you speak about, you know, the decision to have, I believe I'm right, that we weren't going to have any of the heroes that we see on TV would not be playable.
Oh,
like, you couldn't be O'Neill and you couldn't be Jackson.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, boy, that's no. I'm rolling my eyes a little bit because that's not just an MMO design challenge. That's a design challenge in almost any character-driven adventure game.
Pre-existing IP, right?
Mm-hmm.
The problem of pre-existing IP, right?
Where you want to be Lara Croft.
Right. Or, it happens in Lord of the Rings games where do you really want to allow people to play Gimli or Legolas or Gandalf or Aragorn or whatever, right?
Right.
And the games tend to treat that choice very carefully depending on who their core demo is. MMOs are essentially saying, this is a universe you know really well, if it's based on an IP like Star Wars, Lord of the Rings. You know the stories that those characters did, have done, are doing, depending on the show. And you're also going to do adventures that are like that, but they're going to be your own. If we weren't doing an MMO, if we were doing an adventure game where you were going to replicate the stories or replicate the original team and their dynamic,
right?
You'd probably want to use those characters and lean into, if you're going to do a multiplayer game, sure, then they can all play one member. If you're going to do a solitaire game,
You can choose one of the four and have the other
choose
three
one of the four
be
main
NPCs.
ones and just
Yeah.
lean into it.
Right.
But MMOs, by their definition, you're kind of existing. And this was, I'm sort of glad it's all coming back to me now. I'm sort of glad you brought this up, because that was a really early conversation with Brad about how are we going to stay separate? If you're telling stories about these characters and so am I. And I was like, no, we're not using those characters. And he said, why wouldn't you? You know, his first gut reaction was, but it's about those characters.
But you can't have 500 Jacksons and 800 O'Neills.
Yeah, and that idea of the thing that happens in an MMO, especially when it first launches, is you sort of walk into this world and it's crowded.
Yeah.
And not so much anymore, depending on the server, depending on,
I remember
happening.
you telling me the first time you saw Ironforge, you said, Blue, you're like, wait,
it was
wait
unbelievable, because
Nothing prepares you.
they're all real people, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's
The
right.
little dude running down the hallway is somebody in, Portugal, or whatever, right? It's an astonishing idea, and I was explaining to him, Brad, that's what the game is like. It's like lots of people running around in that universe doing their own thing. And it's exhilarating when it feels that way, when it feels like it's crowded, and it's crowded with people who are, if you're in Cheyenne Mountain, you're there with a bunch of people who all want to play good guys, and they're all going to go on missions. Right. And these missions are all going to be about pushing back Ra's new incursion, and that's all a shared fantasy world that you're living in.
And this was so new. Like when we were, it was still very, very new. Like it wasn't like now where you log in and you expect to see hundreds of people and you expect this concurrency. We didn't, it was very new. It was very, very new. Like there was UO a little bit, and there was EQ, of course, but WoW wasn't out yet.
No.
It came.
Well, WoW
it was, but it was brand spanking new when we were starting development.
Right. I remember. I had been hired and had gone out and met the team, and it was just before Christmas of that year.
So this is 06.
And
five.
Or was it 05?
Was it 05? It was Christmas of 05.
Okay, excuse me.
It's fine. I didn't move to Mesa until January of 06.
That's right.
And I sitting in Joe's office, and I'm like, okay, Joe, what do you want me to do over Christmas? And we knew about the assignment from Brad at that point. So
I know what you're going to say. Oh my God.
And Joe said, just play WoW.
Yep.
Just play WoW. We're all playing WoW. I want everybody to play WoW. Because,
and he told you which guild, which server. Yep.
Yeah.
I remember.
Yep. And that was because it was so influential. It had been out a year. Mm-hmm. It launched in November of 04.
04, yeah. That's right.
And really, WoW's success. So, let me think. When I left EA, they had really soured on MMOs because Earth and Beyond didn't do the numbers that they really wanted. And the
same with Ubisoft. Ubisoft was the same.
Sims Online had really tanked.
Oh, wow. That's right. Sims Online.
and I was sitting in the vice president's office, sort of figuring out what I was going to do now. And he said, I'm not going to say his name, but he said to me, if it's so, for as long as I work in this company, we're never going to do another MMO.
Oh, wow.
It's a failed business idea. And that was 2 years before WoW launched. And then after WoW launched, they bought Dark Age of Camelot because they realized that WoW had shown that it could be successful if you just made it fun and didn't make it hard to play. There's another YouTube series out hosted by the woman who was the vice president at Microsoft. Well, the EverQuest team had gone on to do another game. And this debate, how easy do you make an MMO, was still a big debate. Mm-hmm. There was this whole group of developers who believed that MMOs had to be hard.
We were
going to follow WoW. We weren't going to make Stargate hard. We were going to make it fun. The demo for Stargate was different than WoW or Dark Age of Camelot because the fan base was different.
Mm-hmm.
More
mature.
Mm-hmm. More
tech savvy. More tech savvy.
That was
a huge part of it.
And that's why we had the class that was a puzzle solving class.
Yeah. Well, David's laughing too because the whole mini games thing. And remember, and David's bringing people who are fans of the show, and I was bringing people who were fans of the Myst universe and fans of WoW.
Right,
and so, we were going to our, whenever we needed a new influx of fresh blood, that's where we were going. We were each going back to our own
silos,
Yeah.
original wells. Yeah. And so, so if Puzzles has anything to do with that, I'm sorry.
I mean, the design regret I've got is that idea that you would advance through the game by being good at mini games. I wish we had gotten a chance to see whether that worked or not.
Yeah.
Because it was designed so that you didn't have to like combat, or you didn't have to focus on combat to succeed in the game.
Yeah, another path.
So cool.
Yeah, another path.
Yeah.
And
you could take the path of Daniel.
Exactly right. And you got to build the combat systems first. You got to test them. Oh my Lord in heaven! The whole debate about the cover system.
Oh God!
How long that took to boy. But you have to do it first, because if that's not balanced, your whole world building falls apart. But because of that, the dev time that really you needed to see whether the puzzle solving thing could work, it just never happened. And what I remember thinking, after Stargate, the Telltale Games idea of doing IP that was mainly storytelling hadn't happened yet.
Right.
That came in the next 4 or 5 years. And they were more focused on that kind of storytelling, right?
It's fascinating to me, as this series continues, David, you're going to learn, it's incredibly fascinating, the proponents of each aspect of the game. Like Chris being like, can we finish the combat so we can get into more of the, more of the story and more of the, but Dan can talk to you for 3 hours about how incredibly awesome and thrilling the combat was, because
so let me this is so
I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying
everyone has a different thing of meat and potatoes.
And there's
Everyone's meat and potatoes are a little different.
Parts. Yeah.
And they're all valid.
Moving parts that, of course you have to wait for certain things. Like we had to wait for art. We had to wait for clips. We have to wait but there's all these, everything's so incredibly complex and layered in such a way that until you're sitting there living it, waiting for these deliverables, you can't even understand. You can't, I have to go work on this now because this part that I'm waiting for, there's no way I can have that by Tuesday.
I'm glad you circled back, because what I meant by that comment was I knew, having worked on Earth and Beyond, I knew that you could tell a deep, interesting story in an MMO universe. I'd done it. The user data that we had showed that it was the most popular part of that game.
It was working.
They're still playing it today.
Well,
people are still playing it on private servers right now.
No, I'm laughing only because nobody cares. Nobody cares. But it is true. It is true, right?
I care.
But I'm speaking from the point of view of I was the banner waver I was the ambassador for that segment of our user base.
Yes, you were.
Yes. Yeah.
I think it's one of the reasons we got along so well.
I knew that the design staff we had built could deliver an interesting combat system. The downside of the combat system wasn't whether it worked. It was just it took so long to build levels. That was the problem.
That's right.
I knew
complex.
I knew that I had assembled a really good staff of writers. I mean, Sean had worked with me on Earth and Beyond.
Okay.
Brian Hines had worked with me on Earth and Beyond. They had seen it work and knew how to twist the dials to make it interesting. Garvin, his credentials speak for themselves. But the risky part was this minigame thing, because nobody had ever really done it. And finding the right lead designer to handle it was an ongoing challenge.
Who did it? Who was it that you what series of people?
Oh, what series? I can't remember who we interviewed, but we ended up using Steve.
Yeah.
That's right.
Wow.
Because I couldn't find the person who really wanted to do it.
Okay.
Right.
In retrospect, if I'm going to point the finger here, what I should have done is just let Sean and Garvin handle the story, and I should have done it. That's probably what I should have done. But anyway,
Let's have a look at more of the deck.
Yeah, sure. Let's see what else is in here.
And so we begin the SGC Stargate Command. So who are the players?
It's so pretty.
Go to the next slide.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So go back one.
Yep.
This slide is essentially telling Brad, we understand what makes your show work. Because Brad had talked about
The right stuff.
the challenges of writing for the O'Neill character. Because what he brought to the show was part of the core demo, right? Women liked him. And he liked being funny. And that brought both of those qualities to the universe. And, I mean, not that the other actors didn't know how to handle comedy, but it was especially part of what made him charismatic.
God, it was unique.
That cynicism, yeah.
And the thing that I remember us struggling with a little bit was doing humor is tough.
Yes.
You know, if you think about a typical, I mean, it's interesting where it worked. So your typical MMO delivery system is very few characters are voice-overed. Elder Scrolls hadn't happened yet where they voice-overed everybody. So you're dealing with cost and production issues. We wanted to VO the main actors, but not everybody. But often comedy comes through performance, right? The words in the box, writing them so that they land as being humorous is very challenging in an environment like that.
Yep.
You know, and Elder Scrolls did it because didn't they hire some Monty Python people? I can't remember who they cast. I remember some of their writers talking about the fact that they could almost cast anybody when they did that. And they hired a lot of really talented actors to deliver the funny. And so that slide, I remember sticking it in there so that Brad was reassured that tonally we weren't going to go way off over here and do something else, right?
It has to be whimsical.
It had to be, the whimsy had to be in there someplace.
And yes, John Cleese was a
yes, that's who I'm thinking of.
Makes total sense.
Well, yeah.
And and navigating the negotiations with the actors was going to be,
oh my God,
challenging in the following way. It was sort of like what Katie was saying before of Shanks realizing, oh, this is real.
Yeah.
Because, you know, actors being actors are worried about more work because it's such a hard industry to be successful in. You know, going to do interviews in YouTube channels wasn't quite the industry it was going to become, right? But like that whole circuit of conventions and stars and you know, the actress who played Starbuck on Battlestar has her own.
Yeah, Katie Sackhoff has her own show where she's rewatching the series now, and everyone is eating it up, as well am I.
Yeah,
well, but also a lot of what she's talked about is thank God for the convention circuit.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
But it's now a important part of an actor's career.
Yeah,
right?
of course.
Bread and butter. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
So until we had credibility, meaning the game was out and the actors were going to see the opportunities for them, Critical Role hadn't happened yet.
Right.
Right? So that whole universe of this alternate revenue stream was not really obvious to the...
And I don't think you even had those talent tie-ins to WoW. Remember, you had Mr. T, and you had like all these people that were playing. None of that had.
Oh yeah,
none of that had happened.
I'm William
yet.
Shatner, and I'm a Night Elf Shaman, or whatever.
That's
it was.
right.
Yeah, right.
Oh my God, what's your game?
Those weren't out until I think 7 or 8. So
yeah.
we couldn't even think about, well, maybe we'll be able to use these performers on a regular basis. We were really only thinking about it for launch, right? That it would be an advantage if we had a handful of these performers in the game so that the casual fan, and in my mind, the casual fan was the player who was playing a character who advances through the game through mini games. That casual fan would come into the game to go up to O'Neill and say hello, and that moment had to land somehow. And so convincing Brad in this presentation that we understood all that was part of why we did it. Like, as every slide comes up, I'm reliving the meetings we had. This is all written from the point of view of the casual fan, because we knew, if you remember the OpCore teaser, do you remember the OpCore teaser?
The one that Nick made that was like that was like an early...
It was an animatic, right. Eric and Steve Garvin created it. Steve Garvin did the voiceover. I have it someplace.
I have, Nick has it on his reel, and I will get it.
So if
Nick's voice is in it too, I think, right?
What? I'm sorry?
It's one guy.
Go ahead.
It's one guy writing a letter.
One guy yelling or something. Okay.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Writing a letter. Yes.
Dearest Jess, I don't know where to start. How have you been? I miss you. I miss my boy. But he's big now. I'm alive, but I'm sure you didn't know that. I'm alive. In my cage. Time stands still here. My days are a mixture of boredom, dread, and thoughts of the past. Never believe what they tell you, Jess. They have no honor. They had us do their dirty work, and then they got caught playing the game with the wrong set of rules. And instead of acting with honor, they turned us into the criminals. We're not criminals. We're soldiers, just like our fathers. They're moving me today into storage like an old box you don't want to throw away quite yet. But there's hope, Jess. There are a few of us left out there, and Marines never leave their guns behind. And I'll tell you this, if we ever get out, we'll make the rules.
That teaser, while it's effective, isn't written for the established casual fan of Stargate. It has no real internal reference to stuff that a fan of the show would have seen already. They don't know who OpCore is.
Yeah.
It's written for a gamer to understand what the game is about.
Right.
And so we were really aware of the fact that the game's marketing, the bits we were going to be dropping, that you or Katie were going to be dropping to the fan base, had to be created in such a way about who especially they were going to target, right? Yeah. Because every segment of that population was going to look for different things in the game to attract them as to why they were going to play.
Correct.
So that slide that you just had up was really written for the casual fan, right? Essentially, it's saying you're going to spend your first 15 minutes talking to O'Neill, right?
We're getting your feet wet.
Yeah, we're getting your feet wet. Yeah.
And I mean, there's no other person in the world that you should meet first than O'Neill.
Especially at that point in the
if
series.
You're that fan, right? If you're that fan, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And the end of season 8.
Yeah.
Or
they've just gotten back from
David,
fishing.
did you and I ever talk about that I went to undergrad school with Eric Avari.
Yes. Yeah. I sent you a message a few years ago. I finally managed to get Eric Nari to respond. He says hello.
Yeah,
by the
well,
way.
yeah. I mean, I'm using Eric, but I knew him as Nari. Right? Anyway,
Yeah,
go ahead.
absolutely. Okay.
This is interesting. The way we wrote this slide, we were essentially, this whole deck was, can we deliver what a playthrough of the game will feel like to Brad, even though that playthrough might take 6 months or some, long period.
This is the quest arc. And there's going to be side quests, and there's going to be all kinds of other things to do.
Right,
but this
right,
is the story advancing. Yeah.
Yes. So if you look at that slide, it's all written in verbs, right? You do this, you do this, you do this, you do this. To make it clear to Brad that you're not watching stuff happen. You're doing stuff.
Right.
My memory is it was crafted that way, especially because we were worried that he wouldn't understand what you were doing. There's no exposition. There's no sort of context to it. The context is provided by the game. So, all of these slides, one after the other, kind of present you with you're going from event to event, and that you're unlocking the next event by completing the one before it. And like, as Katie said, it's a series of missions linked together.
Can I just say how absolutely tickled I was? That's the best verb I can think of for when I realized that one of the first things you did in the game was go to the beta site, and that was where all our primary beta testing was happening. Like, it was that made me so happy. That warmed the cockles of my heart, because it was just one of those things, because I sat and helped run that, first the alpha and then the beta for so long. But the fact that people landed at the beta site was, anyway, that made me super happy.
Is it that, what part of it tickled your fancy? I'm just curious.
I'm inviting people to sign up on our beta testing site, so that when they go in the game, they can join us at the beta site. So it just made me,
there's something that flows.
That's what I thought.
it was just like so great. Because we are in the game, like in life, we need your help here. We need you to test this. We need you to fix. Things are murky. We need you to find the problems and help us fix them. So it was art imitating life in the best way for a
that's
CM
nice.
who's trying to entice
That's really
people.
nice.
I really love that I love that I'm remembering, but I'm delighted to see that we did something with the time traveling puddle jumper, because there's 2 or 3 of them at this point floating around, and the series addresses none of them. So I'm glad that we took advantage of this here in the story.
Oh man.
So, a couple things. Did we tell you the sort of in-joke about the furlings that we discovered?
No.
Probably, but I don't remember.
Yeah, okay. So, fans were wondering what furlings were, right?
That's right.
Nobody knew. So we asked Brad in this meeting, so what's with the furlings? And he said, I don't know. There was no mystery. They just invented the word. And he said, do whatever you want with them. So that was great. But the thing
That's right. They're never seen on the show, are they? Like,
not
ever?
in canon, no. They're just seen as giant koalas in the 200th episode to give fans some fun.
Oh, really?
I
Okay.
remember that. That's
So
right.
these costumes for the new Goa'uld are just astonishing.
Yes. Eric Belial, Howard, they were geniuses.
I know. Unbelievable, and I mean, look at that.
Yep.
It's just amazing. It's such a shame that these were never built. Oh, Fire Sky, that was the name of the company.
Yeah, it was when you were being interviewed. It was CME initially. That's what it started out as,
Right,
and then
right. That
Fire Sky was going to
Fire
be
Sky.
Fire Sky was going to be the publishing branch. CME was
Yeah.
making Stargate, and
That's
then
right. That's right.
And then there were other teams making other things.
Yeah.
And Fire Sky was the overarching. Yeah, it became Fire Sky.
Man, this would have been, the fans would have just eaten this up, I think.
I agree.
Howard has been gracious to me, particularly in that he's made 3 or 4 visits to the school and worked with young artists, grad students, and going back to the very first question you asked me, which was how much do you talk about Stargate? I talk about it mainly through the art direction. And I do that because Howard gave me the library, right? Yeah. I can pull up these sketches as examples of, here's the story that I tell. So young game designers are under the misapprehension that their job in the future will be to spout brilliant ideas and have everybody build them.
Right.
Doesn't happen. Everything's a collaboration. Everything. Yep. Right?
Yeah.
And so the story I tell, and Steve often tells the same story about Emo and Eric. And it goes like this. So, we would have a weekly meeting in the art department, Steve and I, or Sean, when Sean was in that job. And they would show us stuff that they were working on for feedback. Mm-hmm. And we were struggling with what the Goa'uld were going to look like. Everybody was struggling because they weren't the old Goa'uld, because the Goa'uld had been eradicated. I have that right, David?
Mm-hmm.
That's correct.
They had to be the new Goa'uld in whatever way that meant, whatever new meant, new. I forget the justification, but we needed the Goa'uld because they were so cool that we were all kind of like, oh, why did you kill them off? Anyway, and so we
the next generation.
Yeah, right. We were brainstorming how to justify narratively these other Goa'uld. And one of the 2 artists, I don't remember which one, Howard might remember, came up with this idea of having them be like descendants of French haute couture designers.
Oh.
That Gautier was essentially a Goa'uld, if you just lean into that idea, right?
That's very fitting. Yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Right?
Immediately you can just see it, and everything it conjures is like right there.
Correct. And,
wow.
And
they're going to be very snazzy.
Yeah.
That idea didn't come from any of the design staff. It came from the art team. And we said, that's interesting. And then those sketches started to appear, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And the whole idea of who the Goa'uld were, the new Goa'uld, and how they fit into the universe was not driven by the design team. It was driven by the art team. Mm-hmm. And the game would have been so much better if we had just built it and watched the fan reaction to those Goa'uld, influenced so much by the clothing that they wore. Mm-hmm. It's a shame it never happened, but I use that as an example of you got to let the best idea win.
That's right. Yeah, you
It doesn't
can't,
matter.
sit
It
on
doesn't
your,
matter
that's it.
where it comes from.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just had, I almost hauled the whole library out again this semester. I was working on a team with an artist, really talented, very skillful craftsperson artist who had never worked with a game designer who had an opinion about the way stuff looked, right?
Yep.
And, you know, the first time this student delivered artwork, I said, no, it's not there yet. What do you mean it's not there yet? I'm like, it's not there yet. It's not in line with the overall direction of the game. And it floored him, not because he agreed or didn't agree or whatever. It's just he didn't expect that opinion coming from somebody not on the art team.
Right.
And I'm like, let me go over this. It's our game, not your game.
Right.
And we all get to give you our thoughts. And that idea of that just because you call yourself a game designer or an artist doesn't mean you own all the rights to those ideas.
Or even your part. Yeah.
The one great thing about, I mean, there were many, Brad was so gracious to all of us. Once he understood that we weren't going to deliver a universe that was only one small sliver of the one he had crafted with his team, that we were going to embrace all of it. Once that happened early on, he was really welcoming to all of us and treated us as collaborators.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
He was
I
lovely.
felt, you know, when it went south, right, and he had already committed, I forget, maybe they had shot the first
Stargate Revolution.
pilot of the universe. They had,
Yes.
I mean, he'd already committed to sticking that snippet in the pilot.
Mm-hmm.
That's my memory, anyway.
Mm-hmm.
I could just almost hear in his voice the frustration with those silly game companies. You know, just ship.
Who broke the news to him? Was it you?
I don't know. It might have been me. I don't know. I don't remember. I mean, once things started to go south, I speculate there was a debate about whether how much we should tell them.
And when, and because it was
when.
day to day. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
we all were holding out for a
it
miracle.
was.
Yeah.
You know, this is sort of a little inside baseball, but you know when I knew we were in trouble? I think I might have told you this, Katie. When finance came to me and said, so do we really have to pay the actors up front when they show up for their voiceover?
God.
I was like, what? Yeah.
Yeah.
Holy shit, yeah.
Why are you
Because-
asking that horrible
A, why are
question?
you asking? B, because they don't want to get ripped off, right? Because
Yeah.
once they do the voiceover, it's done.
Yeah.
Once the little tape machine's wheels are turning and their voice is on the tape,
Now we have it.
now we have it. They want
Yeah.
to get paid. And then what
Yeah.
you do with it is up to you. I mean, within the boundaries
course.
of your
They've
agreement,
done their job.
right? They delivered the
Yeah.
fire when ready. You then get to do with it what you want. And I was like, oh boy, why are you asking is exactly right.
Yeah.
There's
What a horrible thing. Yeah.
Yeah, right. But
Okay.
yeah, I don't know. I don't. So anyway.
So that's when you had your moment of uh-oh.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's part of why, because Brad had been so gracious to us,
Yeah.
that I just felt doubly bad. I felt bad for me. I felt bad for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, because he had other things to worry about. He had like 3 shows, right?
Yeah.
I can't even imagine the workload.
And 2 movies and.
Oh, the movies. Oh my God. Yeah, I forgot about the movies.
Yep.
For sure. No, there was a lot going on there. I went up to Bridge. This would have been 2009, like spring of 2009. I was told that it was basically over at this point, and Brad hadn't really known for sure at that point, and it was the whole thing was just a mess. I knew that it was done. I may have conveyed one thing or another at that point. I got into a bit of trouble, but the game. I mean, it became Stargate Resistance not long after that. So what was going to be was just not anymore. I don't even know if Chris, you were still there in spring 2009.
I'm trying to think of the
You had
sequence
moved
of
back
events.
at least, I think, by then.
I think that, well, just like everybody else, I was running out of money to do things like pay rent.
Of course. Yeah.
So
the bills.
Yeah, the bills. Exactly right. And so there was definitely a time when I can't remember his name, the Australian
Jeremy
he
Taylor.
and
New Zealander. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yes. Correct.
It's all right.
He was tasked with doing some sort of PR work, maybe for Resistance. And he and I had a decent relationship. And so he would run things by me just to get somebody else to
Because
read
he was smart. Yeah.
No, I'm just saying, right? And I helped out after I had moved back to Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
Wow.
And
good for you, Chris.
It was fine.
Yeah.
There were, it was complicated. I'm going to back up for a second. So,
You're okay.
game industry, last 2 years, it's been rough. It's sad to say that other companies have been put in positions like we were put in at the time. Katie knows, what I'm talking about here. So the running out of money thing it's just horrible on everybody. It's horrible on everybody concerned. So I'm not going to sit here and say, well, what they should have done was A or B or C, because everybody's situation is different. It's one thing when I have a former student who was working on an MMO that Microsoft stopped middle of the summer last year. Can't remember when they did it. They pulled the plug on a bunch of games. And that was, on Friday they were employed, on Monday they weren't. It was very cut and dry, right? Microsoft just said, nope, sorry, we're going to pay you some kind of severance, but we're done. There wasn't this.
What year? What year was that?
Oh, it was like last year.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, that's right. I mean,
the unannounced Zenny project is the one I'm talking about.
Okay. Yep.
Right?
Okay. Yep.
and Microsoft was funding that, and they just stopped. But that, it's horrible, but there wasn't 3 months of dragging it out like we had, right? Which is a different dynamic, because we were in that space, Katie, of, well, we're going to keep working on it, and you can stay if you want to, but you don't have to.
But it makes you feel, it's the shittiest thing, because it makes you feel like you're disloyal if you don't.
Yeah.
Like,
let's put this in the ball in your court here. Would you like to eat or not eat?
But also,
loyalty. That's not the first time we've heard the word loyalty thrown around in this series.
Right, but it's such a, I mean, some people say, look, we understand, they say it really graciously, like, we know you need to pay rent, we know you need to move on, we're going to still be here, but please do what you need to do. And then there's other people that say, well, they're staying and I'm staying.
I know, and
it's a shitty way to do it, because you feel like if you don't.
It was
right.
awful. It was awful.
It's awful.
And so, having lived through that,
yeah,
you know, and I made mistakes, others made mistakes. So, in the last 2 years, you know, when on LinkedIn, you'll see people criticizing how A or B or C handled it. Mm-hmm. I'm like, until you've been through it,
yeah,
you don't know what you're going to do, right?
You don't know.
So,
yeah,
you know, I made the decision to help Jeremy because I liked him, and he was in a rough spot, and.
But you're also thinking about the fans, the public, what's being seen, not just the people doing it, but who's seeing it. I know you're
all
thinking
of that,
all
of
the
that,
aspects, yeah,
right? All that. And so,
sure.
You know, the question you guys just asked, which was, you know, when did Brad find out? How did Brad find out? I have a memory of maybe not being the one that broke the news. I don't remember that. I might have like blocked that out.
Huh.
But I remember talking to him,
mm-hmm.
and the frustration, like everybody, in his voice, mm-hmm. when they had committed, we had committed, everybody had committed, and now it wasn't going to happen. It was just palpable to me. In the call.
Yeah, of course.
The one other document that I must have, Chris, if you will indulge me, is the document that that was used to convince Brad that yes, this guy gets the nature of the story.
I've got that someplace. Yeah. The idea, I sent the document up. The meeting was on Tuesday. I sent it up probably Friday. I show up in the writer's room. Everybody's there. Martin is there, and the others whose names escape me now. Brad is the last one in the door. And he comes in, and the thing is, he stapled it and folded it and dog-eared it, and there's like color coding in it, right? I'm like, he read it. Holy shit, yeah. He read it.
No, he did his homework.
But that was what impressed me, is he didn't just walk in and say, repitch it to me. That's what I was expecting. He had read it and knew it, and knew what we were doing. That told me a lot. Yes, I'll find that document and send it to you.
Well, that was probably the nascence of him trusting you, and you understanding that he was going to do what he could in his power and limited, time and scope to support you. Because you guys had to say what you will about it being every 2 or 3 months. When you guys spoke, it was on a foundation of trust and mutual respect and understanding that is hard to get these days, right?
The difference, I'm really convinced the difference in terms of his history with game developers came from the fact that when we talked briefly about my background and his background is that we were both theater people.
Yeah.
That's right.
originally.
He's a playwright
and
at his
so-
core. I swear to God. So
Yeah.
He, it's like, oh, well then we speak the same lingo.
Yeah.
And on the day that the three of us flew up there, Garvin and Sean and I, Sean stayed for the pitch, but then Sean had to leave and fly out. So it was Garvin and I for like the rest of the afternoon. And, eventually, we tag teamed our way through the pitch. I gave some of it, Sean gave some of it, and Steve gave some of it. And so lunch, and we're chatting, and I remember that day, Brad was struggling to get an actor, who I won't mention the actor's name, to get on a plane to fly to a shoot that had to happen at a certain moment. And he was frustrated wrangling actors, right? Wrangling actors.
Cat herding. Yeah.
Cat herding, that's exactly right. And so, Garvin made some comment because he was trained as an actor, was an actor for a while.
Right.
And immediately, as soon as that happened, the door was open to like stories, right? And who have you worked with and blah, 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 right?
Right.
And a good friend of Garvin's, who I also knew a teeny tiny bit, was Holly Hunter.
Right.
Holly had been at Carnegie when I was there. I knew her a little bit. Steve met her in LA, knew her better than I knew her. And so when you're in that world, you just start swapping, well, there was this time when blah, 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 right?
Right.
And once Brad realized that we had a shared background, Steve, Brad, and I, he started hauling out these stories about cast members. It was like, oh, wait a minute, there was this time when blah, blah, blah. I was like, oh my God, this is like,
These are the stories you don't want to hear about your favorite show. So as long as it's not, you don't. You just sometimes you don't want to hear this.
And what it spoke of to me and to Steve was that he trusted us.
Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah, for
Right?
sure. Yeah, he knows it's not
He
leaving.
wouldn't have told those stories about actor X.
Yes.
I'm not even going to tell them to you because it's like, really, holy shit.
No, the vault
right.
is shut. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
the
it.
vault is shut. And I remember flying back. Steve and I were like, what a nice guy.
Yeah.
No, truly.
And
Yeah.
the getting back to Stargate, the game for a minute. So Katie and I had that moment with the power armor, right? So the TV ad comes out,
Yeah.
right, where they showed an SG member in power armor,
Yeah.
and the fans go nuts, right? That's not the show. How dare they?
Yeah.
And Brad was just like,
Because our earliest audience wasn't based on gamers, it was based on Stargate.
right.
It's a budget thing,
And-
guys.
And
Every
Brad
Goa'uld
was
would have
like,
had their own helmet if they had the money to do it.
Yeah, but we can't. How much do you say, right? We can't make it about
Right,
that.
no, and Brad was like, and he said to me, we were, I think I probably said to him, you need to be aware that they're going crazy over the power armor, blah, 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 blah. And he left it off because, he said the number of things, I've lost count of the number of things that the audience doesn't understand about the realities of making a television show.
Yeah.
Right.
Budget being number one.
Sure. People would joke on forums week after week about other things that were being filmed at Bridge, saying, "Oh, that looks like that planet that because they were the same locations over and over again that we saw.
Yeah.
And I remember there were times, I mean, you have to do what you have to do. There were times where there'd be a planet and it would look identical to the planet they visited the week before. So they do a filter.
Like you said, every planet looks like green woods because all they had to do.
Brad was asked this at one point, and he put it in one of the illustrated companions for SG1, and I quote him, "For budgetary reasons, we have to shoot on Earth." So that's just all there is to it.
That's exactly it.
That's right.
Exactly it.
So
yeah, not everybody can fly, 2 robots to Tunisia,
That's it.
We got to do with what we have.
Chris, I have to say, being able to reconnect and have these stories again. Let me say this. You only had so much bandwidth every single week. And the fact that you made an hour available to me every single week for a meeting where I essentially got to sit down, me and you, one-on-one, and have a 400 level course gifted to me, downloaded to me every week. I will never forget that because you appreciated I so appreciated that you took the time to explain your process to me so that I really got it. Every week we would have this meeting, and sometimes we would go to Ted's Hot Dogs, and so regardless, it was always just it was one of my favorite times every week that I looked forward to.
Chris is first and foremost the teacher, because he did the same with me, always teaching.
I do appreciate that, but the thing I'll add in that environment was you really need to get the gaming public on your side, right? And you need to, in a environment where the game is going to be live, the more that the audience has your back, the easier your job was. The inspiration, aside from the teaching thing, which I certainly agree with after all these years doing it, but so when Babylon 5 came out, I'm sure you remember the way Straczynski spent time on CompuServe introducing the universe before the show launched, and how eloquent he was speaking about how much runway that granted him with the audience, that they were already pre-sold on the idea of the universe
and
because he had spent time with them online. And then
seeding the ground of those early adopters is so important, because then when people come in, if they want to naysay, if they want to be there to troll, you already have this kind of battalion, for lack of a better word, of people who are like, no, you know what? We don't need that here. Here's where we're at. Meet us where we already are.
When I was hired for Earth and Beyond, the offices, the number of offices in the building at Westwood were limited. You didn't have any of those big bullpens like we had. And I got placed in with the community manager.
You loved her.
And she's now the creative director of the mission group at Blizzard, by the way.
Yeah.
Wow.
So if you're playing WoW these days, you're playing her content. But anyway, and so I learned from her the tricky nature of managing an audience in a live game. Because Earth and Beyond wasn't live when I started, but we were pretty quickly in beta, which is you're then running a live game. And so by the time I began at Cheyenne,
You knew.
I was very aware that this relationship was something that I needed to pay attention to. And going back to the earlier discussion we were having about the established audience for the television show, because I wasn't a Stargate fan before the project began, I mean, David, you were my conduit to that audience, right? And, you know, you were, when you verbalized a thought, whatever that thought might be, about power armor, not that you did, but I'll just use that as an example, I paid attention because for the game to compete in a world where Blizzard's audience was going to play WoW no matter what, because they were such loyal Blizzard fans. The leverage that we had was to leverage the television show's audience. And having struggled with Earth and Beyond to try to educate people about the way that universe functioned,
Right.
when there were no novels, no television series, no compendium online anywhere, that the only thing the players were learning was what was happening in the game while they were playing it. I knew how hard that was.
Yeah.
Oh my God. It's really difficult to do.
Yeah, you came to me early and said, I mean, we started to get together and you said, let me tell you about Maria. And I owe her so much because working on with teams both before and since, I will tell you, not every creative director, not every studio head understands how important that was. And I have to say, the fact that Joe and to an extent Jim and those guys understood the importance and hired me on. Because I mean, I was there before you even.
Yeah,
not before they
I
first considered you, but you know. But then talking to you was never me going hat in hand saying, please give me something. It was you coming to me saying, tell me what you need from me in the gap. And you and I came up with what was an early form of the Ask Me Anything, for example, you know, where you would do a weekly, literally choose a topic and I'll tell you all about it. All those things.
In my archive for that N64 game, THQ, I mean, it's Nintendo. They have all these highways of information to get to their audience, even in the 98, 97 time frame. I have like question and answer sessions about that game.
Yeah. It's just so important. People don't realize, like, it's not like the community manager gets to go shopping and, I can choose this art and this story, you know, and this.
Right, you know. Yeah. This, you're not walking down a grocery aisle.
Right. Yeah. And I can't look at kind of this programming breakthrough and kind of cherry pick. No, not at all, because there are going to be things that for example, I can't remember now what it was, but you and I agreed that there was going to be one thing that we would never, ever, ever reveal, that it had to be revealed in game. Maybe it was Raw, but
it was probably the Furlings.
It
was probably the Furlings because Raw is seen briefly in the teaser that was on the Midway.
There was something, maybe it was it couldn't be Asgard.
It was the Furlings. It had to have been.
Something that you said, this is the one thing that you can never say. Everything else we'll discuss. And so, you know, when we saw Howard's concept art for a character, for example, you'd be like, well, I don't want to just take this, you know, this whole thing and just plunk it down. Like, let's figure out a cool, you know, revelatory way in which we can tease this out. Like, we worked together on every aspect, knowing, and we were so precious with it all, knowing that less was more in that moment. Because we didn't know it was going to end up on the cutting room floor. We didn't know what was going to end up in beta, in live. But the
There's
fact
a-
that you understood and valued that, the fact that Joe, Dan understood and valued that, Howard, all
Yeah.
of them really it's one of the best teams I've ever worked with as far as that goes, as far as community being integral and integrated and not just, a fly on the wall and not just, oh, they're here again. We have to find something for them. It wasn't a chore for you guys. It was important
That's right.
it was an important preceding time for the story and for the elements that you wanted fans to get excited about early, but also so that, because we all know when you say Stargate World's MMO and you've seen nothing, not even the logo for the game. Remember the wording for the game? That was like a whole trailer was just revealing the logo. Like we had nothing to show. And so it was so important that those early first glimpses set the tone and got rid of preconceived notions or confirmed others. It was really important that we didn't have people playing their own game in their mind so that they had this huge this letdown or disappointing moment later on.
That's the tricky thing about moving from one medium to another, right? The
Right.
TV show did this great job of making the universe interesting,
Right.
leveraging on the original movie, building it into its own thing,
Right.
creating characters that you loved and were interested in. It goes to the question that you were asking earlier, which is the decision whether or not you were going to play Daniel or not, right? And what part were you going to play in the creation of this online world when so much of the world already exists in the imagination of the audience? You really have to think that through. And when we were looking just earlier in the discussion about the slides, like the onboarding of someone who comes to the game with their own preconceived notions about what the world is and how it works and what their place in the world is, you need to get them ready to be being more proactive as soon as you can in a world that they're comfortable in. It has to be designed. It's got to be curated in a way that a normal game just sort of assumes that they know nothing and just sort of puts them in and needs to get them going quickly, but they have less baggage to bring with them.
Right.
It's tricky.
Right. It is. Yep. Yep.
There's a lot that goes into play. Before we let you go, Chris, can you please share being a part of the Comic-Con panel? Sitting next to Brad in front of 4,000 people in Ballroom 20. What
David,
an experience.
were you there?
Right. So
You were in the front row, right?
I was with 20th Century Fox promoting Stargate Continuum.
But you
so
were
I'd been
there
let
in
go
the
like the
front
month
row.
before. No, I was like row 3 or 4, yeah.
Okay, but you were right there. Okay.
normally, I'm remarkably unfazed by public speaking.
Yep.
Not that day.
That's a big room.
Well, it's a big room. It's people who know the IP better than I do.
Yeah.
So on the panel, right, my memory is it was Dan and Brad,
Howard.
Howard,
Demetrius.
and Demetrius, right?
Yep.
And I'm at the podium. The cast had been on stage just before us. All I could think of is, don't fuck up, right? Just don't. And I was nervous. And so I'm very unaccustomed to speaking in public and being nervous. So I was off balance. So there's this microphone stand right here, right? Microphone. And I have a very well-established habit when I speak in public, which is I use my hands like this. And I kept whapping the microphone. Right?
Oh man, I forgot all about that. Of course you remember it. You remember it. Yeah.
After it was over, Dan comes over to me and he said, no, it was Demetrius. It was Demetrius. Came over to me and said, if you hit that microphone one more time, I was going to come over there and rip the microphone out of the podium. Because I just couldn't, like, I was aware I was doing it, but I just, like, what I needed to do was, like, take this and stick it in my pocket. And I was so nervous. Because, I mean, that
but everybody was.
Well,
he was too. Yeah.
Who was?
Demetrius was very nervous before.
And Brad's sitting there. Brad's among you guys to provide like a sounding board. And so top of that.
Yeah, I didn't think that was what was. I mean, yes, that's a big deal, but the bigger deal is being in the large room. Comic-Con, right? There's dozens of smaller rooms. This was the big stage. So
my memory is that the power armor thing had already happened.
Oh yeah.
And so my perception was, if I'm a fan and I'm in the room, I'm thinking, show me.
Yeah.
Show me you're not a jerk.
Yeah.
Show me. Normally I'm unfazed, right? It's like I relax and I trust my ability to improv, and I usually am not at a loss for words. So what's the big deal, right? Except the stakes at that particular place and time and day. It was just, wow.
Yeah, you wanted to win them over. I think if we leave with nothing else, it's the level at which you care. This wasn't a job. This it wasn't just the next thing you were doing, in your career. This was hugely important. If it wasn't, then, the whole, the presentation to Brad would not have landed nearly as well as it did. That relationship wouldn't have been nearly as strong. The team that I mean, I even wanted to talk about the fact that, yes, you brought people from Earth and Beyond. Yes, you brought people from, from television and from all kinds of walks of life. But also, I remember we were having a hard time getting really good talent for the entry-level positions. Do you remember you and I went to Carnegie Mellon to interview the graduating class?
Wow.
And there were 3 ETC students that we hired.
Yeah.
And
after interviewing almost all of them. It was a lot.
After interviewing almost all of them.
Yeah.
And 2 of them have done really, really, really well in the industry. It was an advantage to have an understanding of what those students could potentially do. And it helped me when we interviewed Rebecca and Aaron, who were at Collins, sort of having a sense of what kind of gems you could find in programs like that.
Producers, yeah.
But I just remember the level of, they were so, I was 12 or more years their senior at the time, and I remember thinking, oh my gosh, they're so poised, self-assured, but also the talent, and you and I conferred before we even set foot in the building about what specifically we were looking for. And it had nothing to do with the art or the design or whatever they were working on. It was everything to do about them, the person, using words like we instead of I, and how, tell us about, I mean, the typical standard questions, but it was like, we weren't looking for them to tell us how they solved a problem, for example. Like, tell us a problem you once were proud of solving.
Right.
And it was all about how they would, share that with whomever was around them at the time. Like, this is what we were going for, because this is what we already had at CME, and we didn't want anyone coming in that was going to be, hey, I'm the star of the show.
Right.
They were self-confident enough to be like, look, this is who I am. What I want to be is with all of you and helping to build this thing together. And that's one of my real core memories of this whole group of people. And if there is any compliment that I can give Chris, it is that not once have I ever did I remember until this day that Chris wasn't a Stargate fan before the project. I was convinced that you were, and I knew at the time when I was working with you that you weren't until the project, but it bled away because the project was so strong with what your core belief in the property was in terms of who the characters were with each other and with themselves. And that has stuck with me to the point where it's like, oh yeah, that's right. He didn't know the show before coming on. That's how well you did with this.
Well, thank you. But I will circle back and reiterate how welcoming Brad and the writers' room was to what we were trying to do, right? I remember Martin, I don't mean to bring up Martin again, but he was a gamer. I think that's right. He played games enough to understand what he didn't know about the way they were created, but also that the audience down the road in television was going to have to share space with the game world, and that's right. He needed to know more about it. Is he the showrunner of this?
He's the showrunner. It's his idea.
Good for
the fourth series will be. Yeah, that relationship that you guys made happen with Bridge Studios, it was either going to be frictionless, or it was going to be miles and miles of really bad road. And one way or another, this thing was going to move forward. And you guys proved that this thing works. And it wasn't that it failed. We talked about this with Dan. It wasn't that it failed because the ideas weren't working. It failed because it ran out of fuel in its tank. And that was nothing to say a negative thing about the project itself. And that's the real shame of it.
It failed because of speculation on Wall Street. That's really why it failed.
Well,
the very people that were getting into bed with us and investing their money, ended up having the market that they trusted fall out from underneath them.
Yeah.
So
I went into this wanting to really explore the story of the game, but also really wanting to get his backstory. And what we got was both. What we got was his thoughts around the process, but also his blessing to go ahead and run with the story separately, which is what he gave us here. Yeah. He hasn't changed. He hasn't changed a bit.
He hasn't.
And there's something that's very right with the universe, knowing that. It's Absolutely. Like, yes, this is as it should be, which is wonderful.
He's had some incredible experiences, not just before, but since. And,
that's right.
We've talked several times about things that have happened. He's very generous with giving credit to, other people and other circumstances and other studios for
he's self-assured.
His own edification. But man, he gives as much as he ever gets, if not, and 1,000-fold more. Like,
that's a good teacher.
Always,
that's what a good teacher does.
It is. It's good teaching, but he teaches through fun and play, and Anyway,
he should have his own YouTube channel, because his podcast is something that I would tune in for.
Of course,
if he wasn't already so busy.
If he wasn't so busy already, but
exactly.
But no, he's a good one to have in your corner. I'm so thankful I got to work with him, especially in the early days of my career in the game industry. He set the bar. It was
100%.
great. Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Thank you again for doing this series with me. It means
Of
the world to
course.
have you here. Folks, if you enjoy what you've been seeing with this series, please click the like button. It does make a difference with the show and will continue to help us grow our audience. Please also consider sharing the video with a Stargate friend. And if you want to get notified about future episodes, click subscribe. And giving the bell icon a click will notify you the moment a new video drops, and you'll get our notifications of any last-minute guest changes. And clips from this episode will be released over the course of the next few weeks on the Dial the Gate YouTube channel. Katie, I think Howard is next, if I'm not mistaken.
I think so. I'm excited for that one. That's going to be a pretty
God
one.
For all these people. Oh, it's going to be. It most certainly will. It's going to be a lot of attribution, making sure that everyone has the right names out. We're going to do the best we can with that, because there was so much talent that came out of that office that it's just coming out of our ears. The blessings that we've been privileged to show off on this show. I'm thrilled that we had Chris. I'm thrilled that you're doing these with me, and
Thank you for doing it.
I'm over the moon that I get to. You would never have been able to convince me 20 years ago that these assets that you're seeing in this dark room right now, a lot of these are not going to be seen until you show them 20 years from now. I would have laughed in your face.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So privileged that some of this, a morsel of this, gets to come out, and that these artists get their attribution as they deserve.
Finally.
So.
Yep.
All righty. We'll see you on the other side, folks.